Hello, everyone. I see the participants coming in. We will just wait until this kind of fills up. We're going about 1 second, so wait till it finishes. I don't know how long this will take, but until it stops, we'll hold off on starting. Still getting a few more. We're up to 25 people. All right, I'll keep talking a little bit so people know that this is working. So I'm Steve Moore. I'm the co-chair of the Illinois chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'm also an attorney, and so I've been working with our chapter for its various advocacy efforts. Also on the screen, top you'll see Phil, at least my top, Phil Martinez, who, these are all board members. Phil Martinez, we have Mike Duffy wearing the purplish sweater, and Tandra Rutledge. So all of us are board members, and we've all had some experience with AFSP and have various expertise that we hope to use tonight. And then the goal tonight really is to just give you a little bit of kind of a background of what kind of advocacy we do here at AFSP, and some sort of a lesson in the kind of things you can do for your advocacy here in Illinois, particularly with talking with legislators. We have a video from a state representative who will give us some hints on talking to legislators. And then we'll just kind of go through the bills that we're looking at this year that we would like to have us being advocating. So I see people are still joining in, but I'm going to go ahead and at least start the video with a PowerPoint so we can share my screen. Give me a second.
Hi.
Okay, so today is the Illinois State Capitol Day. We've in the past we've always gone to Springfield for a day to meet live with legislators. Obviously can't do that now with COVID, but we will hope to give you some ideas on contacting your state representative or state senator and meeting with them by phone, Zoom, or maybe you can get together with them live depending upon safety protocols. But we'll go through that today. Hopefully in 2022 we'll be going to Springfield. So today is almost sort of a virtual state capitol day, and you'll be having virtual meetings with legislators if you wish. Okay, so our agenda, first thing we're going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about some suicide facts and figures. And then Mike Duffy is going to go through some ideas for how to advocate, and we'll have a few other things, a couple of videos that we'll be showing. Tandra is going to be talking about safe messaging, and Phil is going to talk about just self-care, so that because this is something we need to be aware of. And then I'll just go through the various policies that we will be promoting this year in the Illinois legislature. We'll finish with taking action, and then we're going to have a Zoom meeting after this that will allow you to do question and answer if you want. We also will just take questions during the session. Just type them in. We'll have a Q&A panel on the right, and we will try to answer those when we're finished with this program. But we'll also plan to have a Zoom meeting at the end of this. All right, so I'll first of all start with some facts and figures about suicide. And these are figures generally from the, we receive our numbers from the Centers for Disease Control, and they're always about a year behind. You just saw 2019 numbers about a month ago. And so we really haven't seen what the impact of COVID has been since COVID, essentially looking at March 2020 through now. if you've read anything, there's been a lot of discussion of that, and we just don't know what's going to happen in 2020 in terms of COVID. But for now, we can say in 2019, there were 47,511 Americans that died by suicide. It's pretty much consistently been the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 34, the fourth leading cause of death for 35 to 44, 10th leading cause of death overall. I mean, these are figures that I've really seen since I've been involved with AFSP since 2009. So it hasn't changed that much. And you can see that 36.5% of the people who died by suicide were 55 or older. So that's a big percent, big number of those were that age group. The other thing that's important to know is that for every suicide, there are every suicide attempt. There are 25 suicide attempts for every death. So that when we talk about 447,000 deaths, we're probably talking about around 1 million attempts each, and that's just in 1 year. When you think about it, certainly, obviously, a death has a huge impact on people, but even the attempts are going to affect the person themselves, their family, friends, employers. Everyone is infected by those 1 million people that had some connection to suicide last year. So this is a map showing the United States. If you can't read it too well, that's okay. You can go online and see these at AFSP. What is good to know is that Illinois is actually a little bit lower. It's 10.87 deaths per 100,000, which, by the way, is the way we always talk about the rates of suicide, deaths per 100,000. So it's a little lower than the average in the country. You can see, for example, in Missouri next door, it's 18.21 deaths per 100,000. Iowa is 16.7. So Illinois is low overall. And in the state last year, in 2019, we lost 1,439 residents. In Illinois, it's the 30 leading cause of death. Remember, nationally is the second. In Illinois, unfortunately, I believe it's homicide is the, for that age group, for the 10 to 34, homicide is the second leading cause of death, but suicide is right behind it at the third leading cause. Fourth leading cause, 35 to 54, and overall it's the 12th leading cause of death in Illinois. But what's important to know about Illinois is if you look at this map here, the darker colors show higher rates. So if you look up at the top right-hand corner, which is Cook County, which is Chicago, and the surrounding suburbs, they have the lowest rates. They're between 8.4 to 11.4 deaths per 100,000. And this, by the way, is a 10-year period. Reason it's 10 years, the Centers of Disease Control doesn't let us show very small numbers. For example, if there's only 5 suicides in a county, they're afraid that someone would actually somehow be able to identify that person. So they make us really average these out over a long period of time in order to just show a map like this. But so you can see downstate, though, those rates are much higher, particularly as you get to Southern Illinois or Western Illinois. They're up to 18.8% down in far south part of the state. Now, this is important because for advocacy, one of the things that people sometimes assume is that suicide tends to be a Democratic issue. But if you know your state of Illinois, you realize that these are pretty much Republican areas. And so those of you that live in the western part of the state or in the southern part of the state, your state senator, your representative should be very, very willing to talk with you because you're living in an area that actually has a higher rate of suicide than the rest of the states. So this is an issue that is bipartisan, and there's a reason for it. And this Illinois map really shows why it's important to really contact all of our state legislators, Democratic or Republican, because they, all of them will have constituents in their counties. In fact, if you show this map to any representative, they know which of these counties are theirs, and they'll just kind of look at that and realize there are people in their district that are dying by suicide. All right, so first thing I want to do is have a quick video from Representative Stephanie Kifowit. And so I'll just start that now because she has some really good ideas for, what it takes to be a good advocate, not only a single meeting, but, year round. So let's watch her. And
Thank you, Steve, for having
By the
me.
way, turn up your
My
video.
name
It's a
is,
little
State
quiet.
Representative Stephanie
I'm sorry, your
Kimberly.
audio if you can.
I have been in the Illinois House since 2013. I am the only female veteran in the Illinois General Assembly as a whole, and actually the only Marine Corps veteran as well. So I kind of share that title.
What are some things they should be thinking about when they contact the legislator for setting up those meetings?
Well, thanks, Steve. Definitely. Call the district office to set up the meeting to see if the legislator is available, either here by Zoom, which is becoming much more easier to meet, or by phone, or an in-person meeting with proper social distancing, social health regulations that we need to follow, masks and the like. But I think the number one thing I'd like people to keep in mind of is our calendar and our process that we have. So you mentioned March. We're off to a slow start this year because we have a new speaker, and we have new remote legislating guidelines that we're working in. So we're just starting our committee process at the beginning of March. And so it's really important to keep in mind the process. So by April, we have to be sending our House bills over to the Senate, and the Senate are sending their Senate bills over to the House for consideration. And then by May, we're trying to wrap everything up. So sooner is better. March is a great month to try to contact people. If you're going to start contacting legislators in April or May, you're right in the middle of crunch time, and we might be a lot more busier. So I would say towards the end of March, begin April, as soon as you want to reach out to your legislators, that's the best way to do that. So that's just like talking to legislators 101. Look at the calendar, because we're trying to wrap everything up by May. The second thing is we've already submitted our bills for consideration because we have to pass our bills in the House and then send them over to the Senate for passage. So we have several deadlines. So try to keep abreast of what our deadlines are. So if you want a new bill idea, for prevention or awareness, might not going to be able to be introduced this year. It might be able to be tacked onto a bill that's already in motion. So there's many avenues to go, but always keep in mind that a great idea might need to take some work. It might come back next year. And then like Steve and I were talking about, share your personal story. Let us know why it's really important to you and your stories of if you're a survivor of suicide or or if it's impacted you personally. Share that story and really make that connection. I know that the organizations do what we call on the legislative side robo emails. So they're an email that says exactly the same thing and has your name and your address attached to it. It normally comes from a national organization. What I think is more important is if you don't just call your legislator about this particular action item. Suicide prevention is very important. What I would like people to do is to create a relationship with your legislator, to create that dialogue, to volunteer, to get involved, to start an advisory council with your legislator, and to have that ongoing dialogue. Because to talk to a legislator once is good, but to have an ongoing dialogue with a legislator and to get to know the process and to work with them in the summertime and in the fall so that you can really be effective, I think is far more effective. And to understand and to really get to know your legislator is really important, just from an average citizenry position. So then you can tell your neighbors and your friends how the system works, and they can be active as well. So those are a couple tips, Steve, just off the top of my head, for people to take note of.
Well, if I can offer one more that I think kind of follows up on that, our advocates, have access to resources, AFSP, about suicide prevention, survivor resources, and mental health. Do legislators tap into constituents that have resources like that? Is that worthwhile offering themselves as a resource?
Oh, definitely, Steve. I've had pre-COVID, I used to have a monthly, I used to call it a speaker series, and I'd have people from the community come in, and we've talked about mental health, we've talked about drug addiction, we've talked about, you know, all sorts of avenues. And now in Zoom, a lot of legislators, including myself, are doing Zoom seminars. And again, this is part of having that relationship with your legislator so that you can say, can we do a Zoom seminar on this topic, suicide or suicide prevention or suicide awareness or any other, for lack of a better word, any other subject matters in your library. And legislators really are trying to be a resource to the community. And through that, we could do a Zoom seminar or a actual in-person seminar when things get a little bit more normal and, you know, help spread awareness in the community. That's a fundamental function that I know my office does and many other legislators' office does, that they'd be happy to partner with any one of your members, even a panel of your members, to talk about this very important subject. Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
You know, right in the middle of crunch time. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, so that is our advice from a state legislator. Next up, we have Mike Duffy, who's going to be kind of going through some ideas of Advocacy 101 for you.
So thanks, Steve. I'll try and do my best to follow the expert on that and talk about advocacy from my perspective. And the first thing, as you can see from the slide, is that you know, you really can make a difference if you're advocating, particularly because we're advocating out of our own personal interest. Most of us obviously have had a connection with suicide in some way, and that is a different kind of than you know, what people think of as a lobbyist. Lobbyists are paid advocates, but we're personal advocates. And that does have an effect. It does affect the people that we're talking to. AFSP has a strong history of advocating in this area, both on the federal level and on the state level, and have been effective in passing, or having made sure that certain kinds of legislation is passed. I remember when I first got into this about 7 years ago, one of the big issues was this national violent death reporting system. And it made a lot of sense to me that in order to do a good job in this area, we needed the data that would justify asking for money. A lot of this stuff comes down to money. Let's face it, that's what it's all about. And in order to justify that, there was a proposal, this national violent death reporting system was on the agenda. And it's been very successful. It's now, I think, effective in all 50 states, and the money is being allocated towards that. So it's just an example of one of the successes that AFSP has been involved in. But there's many, many other things that we can get involved in. You can see from this slide, there's just so many areas that may strike your personal interest. It could be LGBTQ, it could be child education in the schools about suicide prevention. It could be the crisis line, which AFSP has been very active in making sure that that hotline that you've been hearing about recently after Meghan Markle, every time it's on the news, they advertise the hotline, the crisis line. So those are the kinds of things that can be done. If you go to the next slide, one of the things, you know, they say that people should never know how sausages or laws are made. And I don't know about the sausages, but the laws, it's kind of interesting. It is a process. But the question is, you know, if you're a legislator, exactly where do these bills come from? What's the origin of the bills? And it's interesting because they can come from anywhere. They can certainly come from the personal interest of the legislator. I'm sure somebody like the state rep that we just heard from, if she's a veteran, veterans issues are going to be very important to her. She's going to be supportive of them. And there's a tie, of course, to suicide prevention in the veteran community, as the veterans have a very high incidence of suicide. But constituents is also an area that legislation can originate from. If constituents, particularly in a large number, go to a rep and say, here's what we need. We need suicide prevention education in our schools. This is something that we would like to talk to you about. What kinds of bills can we bring to the floor with regard to these issues? That's something that will get their interest. And certainly organizations like AFSP can be very helpful in doing that. If that's something that you have an interest in, that your legislator can become interested in, AFSP can help in trying to bring that to fruition. And we should try that. Now, this is something probably Steve knows much more about this. Steve's been involved in drafting some of these things, but the bills can come from either house. You know, there's obviously a couple of, I don't know how much people have a background in this stuff, but there's two branches in each government, state or federal. And the House representatives can, legislators there can introduce bills. They can be introduced in the Senate, but they have to essentially go through a committee process, whatever committee is involved, the Education Committee, of course, the Appropriations Committee, those kinds of committees will meet and discuss the bill. The bill, if once it's approved in one house, will then proceed to the second house. If it's in the House, it goes to the Senate, starts in the Senate, goes to the House, and eventually to the governor. As we know, sometimes the floor leaders can be very instrumental in deciding which legislation proceeds and which doesn't. Everybody knows about McConnell's efforts in the United States Senate and his ability to control legislation, but it's still needs to go through the entire process if it has any chance of ever becoming signed into law. And now the governor has various options once it gets to his desk, but essentially that's the process for the most part. Some of this stuff that the state rep just told us about, but there's all kinds of sort of viewpoints on the best thing to do in order to have an influence with your rep. And certainly these advocacy days are great. I mean, I loved it. I loved going to DC. I love just being in the rotunda and being in the various legislative bodies. But one of the things I think is more important, and this can be debated, but I think talking to your rep at home is the way to go. It is establishing a relationship. It is, I mean, she's right, robocalls. I mean, they may have some place in that they calculate how many are in favor, how many are against a piece of legislation, but they really aren't going to change anybody's mind for the most part. But establish a relationship with your state rep or your congressional representative at home is the way to go. The advocacy days need to be held at a certain time of the year so that they have some time to talk to us. But you can get your congressman, your senator at home in their home office a lot easier than you can in DC for the most part, or even in Springfield. And that's the time to make the connection. One of the things that I found is that they get on their mailing list, they have a town meeting, go to the town meeting. And I had a brother that was a state senator for 8 years, so I got the insight on this. Those guys have big egos. And what you want to do is you want to say, hey, thank you for what you're doing. You're one of the best in this area. I mean, and nobody's against suicide prevention stuff, by the way. Talk to them like that. Say, hey, you know, this is really important to us, and it works. The other thing is at a town meeting, what I found is give them a softball question. Say, I know you've been very supportive of this. What can be done about, you know, education in the schools or suicide prevention, and give them an opening. Say something good about them, give an opening, and they'll love you for it. I mean, that works. Social media, and one of the things my brother told us too, by the way, if you're going to start off saying, you idiot, you blew this legislation, they're not going to read your email. So they sit there reading their emails when they're in a subcommittee that's boring, or even when they're on the floor and they're not doing anything, and they'll just delete that immediately. So you want to get a hook into them and say, like, you know, those of us that have been doing this say, you know, I'm involved in suicide prevention. My 23-year-old daughter died of suicide 7 years ago, and this is extremely important to my family. And we'll do everything we can to make sure that, you know, we minimize suicide in the future. Boom, you know, you have a hook into them, and you can then begin to establish that relationship. So all those things work. Offer to be a resource, as Steve said, and the state rep said, is very good. If they do get involved in legislation, they need something, they can come to you. Once you get recognized, boy, that's the way to go. So those are my quick thoughts. I wrote down a couple of things about that, but I think that's basically, the things that have come to mind to me. That I know it is very interesting. I have to say, to me, it's very interesting, and you can do a lot of good for a very good cause. So the effort is worth it, and I would encourage you all to participate to the extent you can.
All right, thank you, Mike. One thing I want to add that Representative Kifwood mentioned is that you could actually, provide them with some sort of programming. For example, AFSP has Talk Saves Lives, which is about a 30-minute, 40-minute PowerPoint presentation that's sort of a basic introduction to suicide prevention. You could, talk to our staff, Courtney or Angela, about getting trained to be a presenter for that, and you could, offer it to the state rep, state senator, and they probably will get together a group, and you've now made a friend. You've also educated a bunch of people in your community. So, feel free to offer AFSP programming, contact us if you're interested in that kind of thing. And that's certainly another way to get involved. All right, next thing we want to talk about are telling the story, because you heard Representative Kifowitz. She did mention that it's worth telling your story. And as Mike said, that makes us different. We're not typical lobbyists that have a financial interest. We have a personal interest. And not only that, when you walk out of their office, they'll remember your story, not the statistics that you give them or anything else we've given you in the briefing papers. They're going to remember your story. And so that's what really makes an impact. So that's a long intro to kind of a couple of real short videos. And then Tandra is going to talk to you about how to tell your story. So first off, this is from Game of Thrones, the last season, the last episode. And turn up your sound. It's a little quiet.
What unites people? Armies, gold, flags, stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it.
Okay, next up we have Jane Fonda, who gave a speech, acceptance speech a couple of weeks ago at the Golden Globes. And she gave a really nice presentation as to why stories are important.
In turbulent, crisis-torn times like these, storytelling has always been essential. You see, stories have a way they can change our hearts and our minds. They can help us see each other in a new light, to have empathy, to recognize that for all our diversity, we are humans. And they generate a new energy that can jolt us open and penetrate our defenses so that we can see and hear what we may have been afraid of seeing and hearing.
Okay, so that's a lead in to Tandra Rutledge, who gets one of the greatest lead-ins ever, Jane Fonda.
Man, that's hard to follow, Steve, really? Thank you, Steve, and good evening, everyone. Those two videos and honestly, everything that we've heard this evening has been very impactful. And so I'm going to be spending some time talking with you about telling your story. One of the things that I love that Jane Fonda said is that it's our stories that connect us to one another and connect us to our humanity. And so it's so important for us to share our stories and our connection to suicide, but we have to do so responsibly. And as advocates, we come from many different backgrounds and we have many different experiences. Some of us have lost a loved one to suicide. Some of us have our own struggles or support someone who struggles. And some are professionally invested in this space through their work. Keep in mind that telling your story can save lives, but only if we share it safely. AFSP has some amazing resources for us as advocates in helping us to share our story with one another and share our story safely with our legislators. It helps people know when we share our stories, it helps people know that they are not alone and that recovery is possible. And so there are several resources that we can provide to you as advocates and that you can share not only with your legislators, but your family members, your friends, and people that you know about how to talk about suicide in a safe way. And remember that there are some best practices, there are some do's and don'ts in how you talk about your connection to suicide that is very important, because we don't want to trigger someone else by sharing our story. We want to share a story that gives people hope and that connects people to this issue that is very important to each one of us. You can go to the next slide, Steve. This is, I smiled when I saw this picture in the slide presentation. This was 2019. This was our last in-person state advocacy day. And I think it's just very appropriate. If you see my head, I'm in there, and Steve, you'll see a few of us in this picture. But what I love about it is that part of our mission is to give people hope. And AFSP is big on giving hope. Our stories connect us, our stories unite us, and telling our stories also heals us. And so the next slide, I think, has a very helpful outline of some tips about how do you speak about suicide? How do you tell your story? Well, you should be in a safe place in your own recovery. So you have to be ready to be able to share your story, because through your story, you want people to connect, but you also want to make sure that people feel hope from you sharing your story. You don't want to share details, as we mentioned earlier, because it may be triggering for those around you. You want to make sure that you always share resources, as Mike mentioned with Meghan Markle sharing her struggle. And as they talk about it, as they've been talking about it, they share those resources. So making sure that you have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline or the Crisis Text Line, and you have those resources readily available to share with anyone as you're sharing your story. And finally, it's important to practice. You might not think it's important, but it is very important for you to practice, because the more you're comfortable with sharing your story safely and talking about suicide, the more we can break the stigma. As we know, talk saves lives. And in order to address the stigma around suicide and mental health, we have to talk about it, and we have to do so safely and responsibly. Next up, we'll have Phil Martinez. He's going to talk about the importance of self-care.
Thank you, Tandra, and thank you all for joining us tonight for this important topic. And we really appreciate your taking the time out to talk about these things. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes here to talk about self-care of ourselves and our environment. It's something that's very important if we're going to go on these advocacy calls, that we need to be very aware of our own self during this. It's very easy to get lost in the stories that we tell, because they are very powerful and very passionate. But we want to keep in mind, which is the first one we're going to talk about, that self-care is such an integral aspect. If we don't take care of ourselves, how do we expect to take care of those that we care about, or those things that we care about, as fully as we possibly can? So for the mind, we talk about simple things. Have a daily routine. You know, it's been very difficult for folks. Well, for some, it's been the exact same Groundhog Day during COVID, but having a routine, having something that you're committed to each day, that you can set goals towards. And when I talk about goals, I love to use the acronym SMART. You have goals that are measurable, attainable, realistic, and time sensitive. That you make goals that you can actually accomplish each day. Make a gratitude list. You know, maybe be out there with You know, it's easy, again, once again, during these times of crisis, to look at the things we don't have or the things that we're lacking in. And it's so easy to look over the simple things that are right in front of us each and every day and be grateful for. Take breaks. Take breaks. Step away. Walk away from things sometimes. Turn the news off. Put the paper down if anybody ever reads a paper anymore. But do those things where you give yourself a mental break, because in other words, to be able to attack these, or not attack, but address these issues in a more relevant manner, you know, we have to be well rested and practice mindfulness. In other words, practice being present in the moment, you know, take in the surroundings, take in what you're experiencing, take in your own emotional state, but be present. Don't think about what I did yesterday or what I have to do tomorrow or later this afternoon. It's staying present in the moment. Read a book, you know, educate yourself. It doesn't have to be something with regards to education, but it's something, again, that takes our mind to a place where we can regiment it in a way that we can focus on something that takes us outside of ourselves sometimes. Develop a project, activity, or new skill. A lot of people I know during this pandemic, during this time of self-quarantine, have taken up either old hobbies or new hobbies, you know, things that I've always said, you know, I want to do this. Just because there are things going on that we need to take care of, it doesn't mean that we stop taking care of ourselves or do the things that we care about. You know, acknowledge something that you did. It's okay to give yourself a pat on the back every once in a while. It's not grandiosity. It's recognizing that, you know, the accomplishments that we do ourselves each and every day, we don't do them for the pats on the back, but we need to understand that that is something that we have accomplished. Schedule worry time. I'll repeat that one again. Schedule worry time. In other words, give yourself a block of time or a block of space, because those worries, they're going to come. They're going to come, and sometimes we can't control them, but sometimes we can contain them, which kind of leads me into the next one about journaling. Some people will write their worries on a list, just like they might write their gratitudes on a list, and they time limit themselves to 15 or 20 minutes where they do that, or they journal about what they're feeling on a daily basis and what these things might express or bring out to them, which brings us to the last one. Express your feelings. In other words, don't bottle them up inside, whether it's journaling, whether it's sharing with a friend, whether it's in meditation, or for people of faith in prayer. Express your feelings in some way, shape, or form, because when we try and bottle them up, they're going to come out in some way. They're going to come out in some way, and usually in some way that we don't want them to. Next, we talk about the body. We need to take care of this temple that we need to do all of our work in. So walk, exercise, go outside if you can. You know, we're finally getting to that weather. Well, with the exception of yesterday and some of today, we're finally getting to that weather where we can go back outside and we can safely social distance, but we can get that exercise. It doesn't have to be marathon training. No offense, Steve. It doesn't have to be something, you know, vitally active. It's taking a walk around the block, a walk in your neighborhood, you know, a walk to the corner. You know, just get out there and get that fresh air. Set a sleep routine. Give yourself a sleep ritual that gives yourself enough time to rest and restore. Without that proper rest and restoration, we know that those things can have a paradoxical effect on the things that we try and accomplish throughout our day. This one's one of my personal favorites, and I think they added it just for me. Practice meditation and yoga. You know, it's something that it's not intended for everyone, but as somebody who is a very big believer in both of those practices, it is something that helps center yourself. It's something that helps bring the craziness of the world to a standstill so that you can get better prepared and have your body in a state to deal with the stress or the things that you may be taking on. Take deep, slow breaths. Something that any of us can do anytime and any place, because sometimes we can get activated with our emotions, and we're talking about very emotional topics sometimes, and sometimes we need to slow down. We need to take those deep breaths. We need to take the time to give our body the chance to reset and continue forward. Sometimes we just need to take a bath or shower. You know, it may not be the grime and the soot of the dirt. It may be the grime and the soot of the emotions that we're carrying that we need to wash and cleanse off of ourselves. And that hot shower or that luxuriating bath can do wonders for some of us. Eat something healthy. It doesn't mean, you know, you need to change your entire diet all the time, but it's the same in the computer language, the old GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If we don't put the healthy things in our body, we're not going to get the healthy responses that we need. Doing relaxing things like the simple things such as drinking a cup of tea, but leading into our next one, limiting the amount of caffeine and alcohol that we intake, because those can have detrimental effects to our body and our performance. And put on your favorite song and dance. You know, I love that expression, dance in the room like there's no one watching. And that's one that I take to heart as well. I will not demonstrate, I'll save you all the pain of that, but it is something, honestly, that I'll crank up the music and I'll just let go, because it helps me. Again, it helps my body physically to give that physical release, and whether it's tension, stress, anxiety, whatever it is, I have that physical release by listening to that favorite song and engaging in dance. Next, we talk about the soul. Ask for help. Always ask for help. If some people are like, you know what, I don't want to put other people out. I don't want to put my problems on them. If they can't do it, you have to trust the people you're asking for help are going to be able to say no when they need to, but they are not going to know we need help unless we ask for it. We can't just assume they must know how busy I am. They must know the stress I'm under. They don't. They don't, because they're doing their own thing. So don't be afraid to ask. Donate to a cause. It doesn't always have to be money. Sometimes it could be our time. Sometimes it can be our resources. Sometimes it just can be, you know, the things that we have available to us, but it helps us to invest in others and get out of ourselves. Tell someone you love them. You know, I still remember this one when I first held my oldest daughter in my arms in the hospital the day she was born. I remember looking at her face and saying, I'm going to tell you every day that I love you. And it was a commitment that I wanted to make, because it was something that I know that was missing, and something that I know that when it is missing, we feel it. And if we cannot share that connection with others, if we can't get to that level, then, you know, we need to really focus on being intentional about that. Reach out to someone who may need you. Sometimes the best thing for ourselves is to get out of ourselves and get into somebody else. Be there, that support. Be there for someone else. When that someone else asks for help, be the hand that's there that reaches out to them. And follow the feel-good social media. Like I mentioned before, sometimes we got to turn off that news. We have to turn off the CNBC. I know that John Krasinski had a thing called the feel-good news that he did at the beginning of the pandemic, where each week, and I think it was a daily presentation that he did, where he would just report good news. Seek that out, because so much of that is not in our general media. Seek out the fun stuff, whether it's social media, whether it's Reddit, whether it's Instagram, whether it's, you know, whatever it is of your choice. Seek out that stuff that tells us the stories that help us feel good, not just the stories of the wrongs that are in the world. And set good boundaries for yourself. Don't overextend yourself. Don't spread yourself too thin or so thin that you start unraveling at both ends. So we do that by setting boundaries. Right, going back to the journaling piece that I talked about earlier, write a poem or a short story. There's nothing better for expressing ourselves for some people than putting it into words, and something that we can often come back and reflect on to help, you know, inspire our soul to continue to do what we want to do. Share something special. You know, again, this doesn't have to be monetary. It doesn't have to be physical or tangible. It could be sharing time. Sharing a story, as Kendra was talking about, can be so powerful in connecting. And that last one, connect with whatever inspires you. You know, what inspires me may not inspire Steve or Mike or Tandra, but you have to connect with those things that inspire you to take you to that next level. And finally, just talking a little about the surroundings and the environment. Create a retreat space. Create that space where we're going someplace that we have that safe place for us that we can call our own, where we can kind of get away from everything and just have that safe place to be. Make your space comfortable. And as I said, make it safe for you. Display something you like to look at. Display, you know, whether it's trophies, whether it's artwork. I have a couple of huge mandalas hanging up in my yoga room. It helps me to focus. It takes me out of myself. I can get lost in that imagery, and it's something that is just generally pleasing to my eye, as well as the lighting too. Watch your favorite movie or show, or something you've been meaning to see. Now, this is one that I really take to the extreme. Prior to COVID in 2019, I attended 143 movies in the theater. So this is one that's very near and dear to me. And I'd like to say I watched everything on Netflix, but almost. But again, it's not just escapism. It's taking care of ourselves. It's giving ourselves new surroundings, especially in this time where most of us for so much of the past year have been confined through self-quarantine or the mandatory quarantines that we've seen in place. It helps us get away in the mind, get away in the spirit, and finally join a virtual gathering. You know, a lot of people became, you know, are very Zoom savvy these days. And it's like, well, it's not the same as a personal in-person, you know, face-to-face contact. And you're right, it's not the same. But it's a good alternative for us, seeing those faces, hearing those stories, laughing, smiling, crying, you know, being able to be there for someone, to be able to see and to connect. You know, it can be on an individual one-on-one level, or it could be on a group level, which I've seen many times happen over and over. But it's all of these four areas, all of these four spheres are things that we need to be more intentional about, to allow us to do the things that we want to do, to allow us to do the work and practice the philanthropy that we want to practice in our lives. So please, you know, take to heart, we're not just caring for others, we're caring for ourselves, and thereby making it possible for us to care for others. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Phil. And I should have introduced Phil as a clinician. If that wasn't obvious, you should know now. We are really lucky to have on our board, you know, someone like Phil. And also Tandra, by the way, has clinical background. So this is a board that has a lot of expertise that we're very fortunate to be able to share tonight. So our next up is going to be a panel. See if we can get this to go forward. So Tandra and Mike and I have all visited Illinois legislature down in Springfield. We've also visited out in Washington, D.C. at the AFSP National Forum, Advocacy Forum. So we want to talk a little bit about just our experiences, just to let you know that it's easy and fun. It's probably a good way to put it. So Tandra, you know, Mike, do you guys have a favorite story of any of your visits to, you know, whether it's state or federal? Tandra, why don't you go first?
Well, I know that Steve knows about this because I was really excited when, I think it was in 2019 when I had a visit with my representative, my Illinois state representative, Ann Stava Murray. And I was prepared. I had everything. I had done all my readings. I knew, you know, what I was going to say. I had a story to share. And I walked in her office. First of all, I met with her, you know, which was pretty awesome. But I walked in her office and she was the warmest, most relatable person. And she asked me to sit down and she shared an inspirational card. She had these cards on her desk. She asked me to pick one and we started talking about the quote on the card and we just started having a conversation, just like I would have a conversation with a friend. And she was very warm and I was so very excited. And she listened to my story. She listened to why I was there. And it was a great meeting. I left there like, yeah, you know, like, this was great. It was so much fun. And I really felt like beyond just talking about the legislation that she was interested in me, and she shared about her. So I felt like we established a very strong connection. So that's probably one of my favorite and one of my first, really, as I would call it, successful meetings with a legislator.
And Mike, how about you?
Well, there's a lot of them, but the one that I remember for crazy reasons is, I don't know if the first time I was in DC or the second time, but I think Tammy Duckworth was a congressman at the time, before she was a US Senator. And we went, now usually you end up talking to staff, I have to say, but every once in a while you actually talk to the rep or the senator. And we went into her office and we were talking to the staff person, and Rick was with us, Kirchhoff, another co-chair actually of our board. And he was a military vet and she's a military vet. I don't know if that's the reason, but then here she comes out and she's got like a biker jacket on with these studs coming out of it, you know? And if you know her, I mean, she's a very vibrant personality. And it was so much fun just talking to her, you know, and she was talking to Rick. And I mean, she had like a leather skirt, a leather jacket on with these studs coming out of it, I thought. And then she becomes a US Senator. So I actually have that exposure. And I have one other one. So our state senator here was Pam Altoff. And so I had met her a couple times in Springfield, I think. And so one of the things, I should mention this, I mean, you don't have to give them a donation, but if you give them a small donation, they watch those donations, I have to say, and that gets your name in front of them. Now, probably not for Senator Durbin, it won't matter at all, but for like a local politician, a state senator, state rep, it impresses them. So I got to know her through AFSP, and I would, you know, whenever something would come up, I would send her email, whatever. And then I had a different matter, entirely different, for this church I go to. And so I went into her office and she goes, "Oh, Mike Duffy, you know, you're here," and impressed the hell out of the guys I was with. So it worked, you know, it was good. And so thank you, AFSP, you got me in with this person.
I've got a couple just to show you, you know, how important we are to them. So a couple of years ago, I was in a meeting with in Washington again with Roger Krishnamurthy, and he actually found time to meet us. So we were in he'd set aside 10 minutes, and we're in his office talking. And then after 10 minutes, an aide knocks on the door and says, "Your next meeting is up." And he looks at him and says, "Tell him to wait." And we talked for another 5 minutes, and aide knocks on the door again, and he says the same thing, "Tell him to wait." And he just wanted to talk with us. Similar story, I think it was a different year. We were in the waiting room waiting to meet with just one of the aides of Jan Schakowsky. And she walks in the door and looks around and says, "Who are these people?" And the person says, "They're waiting to speak with me. They're with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention." And she looks at her aide and says, "What do I have next?" "Oh, you're meeting with, you know, some corporation." He says, "Tell them to wait. I'm going to meet with these people." And she got us up and she met with us, even though she had no appointment. They'll just treat you well. Finally, I want to show you just the importance of telling your story. This is the same year that in 2019 with Tandra, I had gone, actually we were supporting a bill and I was going to testify the next morning. So I went to Springfield to try and just talk to some of the legislators and give them our talking point brief. As it turned out, the Democrats were having a caucus. And so the only people that were around were the Republicans. And because it was an unplanned meeting, they had nothing to do. They had nothing on their schedule. And so I was able to talk with 3 representatives from downstate Illinois, and all of them, you know, had their own story. You know, one was a veteran and talked about how, you know, he was had been pushing a suicide prevention bill for veterans. Another one talked about just how his part of the state he was the far south, how his state had the highest rate in the state. And then the third one, he was just pleasant. He just talked, you know, pleasant things, was very nice to me. Next morning at the hearing, those first 2 tell their story, you know, about how one talks about his veterans bill, the other one talks about, you know, how his district is such a high rate. The third one, who had just been kind of pleasant to me, starts saying, you know, he starts crying and says, you know, a week ago, a 12-year-old girl in my district died by suicide. This is wrong. We cannot have 12-year-old girls dying. And he was crying. It was just, you know, everyone was just stunned. And, you know, he was apologizing and the other members are all trying to console him. It was just an extraordinary meeting. But just by telling your story, you give them permission to tell their story. And here he was telling it in front of a live committee with, you know, probably, you know, 50 people in the room, plus all the members of that committee. It was just an amazing moment that really shows the power of our stories and how you get permission. You know, once you tell your story, you get permission for them to tell their story. I think we, you know, we're already kind of running late, so I'd love to have Mike and Tandra talk more, but unless you guys have something else you wanted to say, I think we'll move on. Mike, Tandra? Okay, let's just move on to the next part of our presentation here. I'll be real quick on this one. Just a couple of resources you should be aware of. First of all, if you go to the Illinois legislature website, and we'll send you this PowerPoint, by the way, so you can just get this link. It's when you go that, you can see the bills that we're talking about. You can follow them if you want. You can see a copy of the bill. You can see all the amendments. You can track what happens to it. If you click on your, you know, you'll see a place there for members. You can click on your members. You can see what committees are on. You can follow the work that they do. So there's a lot you can do by just going to that website. So it's really useful if you really want to be active in this area. This is something that our chapter was really heavily involved with back in 2019. As I said before, I was testifying on a bill. Well, this was the one. It required the Department of Public Health to start doing suicide prevention, but it also required that the state create a new state plan. And so one of the other members of our board, Beth Morrison, and I were members of the committee that wrote that bill, or that plan. And so you can see the link to it here. And it's a total rewrite. It has a really nice comprehensive view of the current knowledge of suicide. It's a very much a public health goal. It shows the goals and objectives that we should all have for addressing suicide. And when I say all of us, I mean every single element of society. We have links for resources, but we also have activities. We listed 200 different things that employers can do for governmental bodies, whether it's local or state, individuals, public interest groups, healthcare organizations. So we educational institutions, whether it's K through 12 or colleges, you know, we have things any of them can do to help prevent suicide. So we're really making a big effort to get this out there to organizations. So I do urge you to download this and look at it, and you know, maybe bring it into your practice. Whether it's, you know, we even have ideas for churches. So you know, look it over and see if you can help out. AFSP, if you go to our advocacy, so just go to afsp.org/advocacy. It has all kinds of great resources for whether it's state or local bills. We have all of our priorities. We have the tracking. You can see what issues we're raising, and you can actually then through that, if you haven't already done it with the action alerts you get, you can, you know, go ahead and send a note to your legislator. By the way, if Representative Kifwit mentioned these robo calls or robo emails, and that's what this does, unfortunately. But if you look at it closely when you get that, in fact, you got one this morning. You got one from our advocacy office in Washington that listed the bills that we're interested here in Illinois. But if you look at that closely, the first, I think maybe the second paragraph leaves a place for you to put in your own information. I think having listened to Representative Kifwit, you can see now that we really need to up our game on these things. We need to tell our story as much as we can in that paragraph or two. I mean, you can do quite a bit. I've never gotten more than about 7 or 8 lines. I never tried, but I think I may start doing a little more now, just to make it clear that when that email shows up in their email box, they're not just going to say, oh, that's another one from AFSP. You know, all they got to do is all of a sudden see, you know, I lost my, you know, in my case, I always start mine out now. You know, I became involved with AFSP in 2006 when I lost my son, Paul, to suicide, a 19-year-old in college. That gets their attention. And then I get into a little detail.
Move it up to the first paragraph. We should move that up to the first paragraph.
Yeah, I wish I could. Unfortunately, AFSP has their format, and it's so do what you can. But I definitely encourage you, if you're going to use that particular service where we send you those action alerts, fill them out, definitely put in your, not only your story, but if possible, think about the bill or bills that were in that particular letter and try and make it relevant to your story if you can. I mean, I always try to do that also, just so that they see I've read what we're proposing and I know what it's about. So do your best, do your best on these things to really make it meaningful when it crosses their desk. So I'm going to now talk about a little bit about the priorities we have. And by the way, we're going to send you, if you already got today, you saw the briefing paper. And so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because you've already got it. This is pretty much not quite word for word, but we have in this the different priorities that are in that briefing paper. And you're also going to get, tomorrow, we're going to send out an email with the information that Tandra covered for the safe messaging. And also we have that same image that Phil went through for the self-care. So you don't have to worry about having, if you took notes, I'm sorry, I should have warned you ahead of time. You will be getting those, and so don't worry about those and or even what you see now, because these are pretty much, like I say, our briefing paper. So the first thing we really want to push this year is an appropriation for the Department of Public Health. And again, getting back to that bill that we pushed in 2019, it required the Department of Public Health to start doing suicide prevention. There is no state agency in Illinois that has a person dedicated to suicide prevention. The Department of Public Health had someone that helps out with it a little bit with the Illinois Suicide Prevention Alliance, but she has other responsibilities. There are people in Department of Mental Health that sometimes touch on it, Veterans Affairs a little bit, but there's no one that actually is really dedicated to suicide prevention in this state. So the governor proposed that there'd be $750,000 given to the Department of Public Health to start doing suicide prevention. And this is really our main priority. We want to get that appropriation done. And so one of the legislature kind of works on two tracks during the spring. It works on bills that, among the ones that you'll see coming up next, but there's also a big part of it really is the appropriation. And what it does is it has various committees that look at different agencies. And so there's the two committees looking at the Department of Public Health. We really want to, focus our attention on getting those committees to push this particular appropriation through. So when it comes to the full floor, when they all come together, it'll be in there. So this is one of our major efforts this year is to get that money. Second priority we have is suicide prevention for education. First one is pretty simple. It's just to get an ID card. We would want to have the suicide prevention lifeline number on student ID cards. This bill does it for 7th through 12th grade, and then there's a second also for colleges. And the idea is, number one, you want it handy if they need it, but also just the fact that it's sitting there, students will see that and it just sends the message that it's okay to ask for help. It sends friends of students, it's okay to tell your friend to get some help. So it really just kind of removes that stigma by just having the number out there. We think it really will help just remove the stigma of suicide prevention, of asking for care, asking for mental health care even. So it's really important just to get that, very simple idea of getting that number on the student IDs. So on the right here, you see just an example of that. They have a key, Academia High School, and then the numbers at the top. That's all we're asking. Just put it on the student ID card. So I'm going to go through. Next bill we're looking at is House Bill 577. By the way, the parentheses are the people that are sponsoring it. So in this case, it's Representative Skifwood happens to be one of the co-sponsors of this one with Representative LaPointe. So this one amends the Anne Marie's law, which was passed about maybe 4 years ago. And that particular law required school districts to start having a very comprehensive suicide prevention plan, and also a plan for if there had been a suicide in the school, what do they do next? And so this particular bill just strengthens it by adding a requirement that instead of just have a plan, it actually requires the plan to have particular information about at-risk groups, which would include students with mental health or substance use disorders, those who have engaged in self-harm, or those who have had previous attempts, LGBTQ, those who have lost someone to suicide. So we want these plans to actually have some teeth and a little bit of substance to them, so that they have some, actually treat each of these particular at-risk groups a little bit differently, or at least with a higher degree of care. So that we'll move on with that. Okay, priority 3 is access to mental health and suicide care. And by the way, AFSP, of course, we are interested in suicide prevention, but we also understand that because 90% of the people that died by suicide had a mental health condition, we really do try to promote mental health and bills that address mental health. And one of the things that we've been really pushing, really since, almost since I've been working with AFSP, is a thing called parity. And the idea of parity is insurance companies have traditionally treated mental health as something that they try to avoid paying for. And the parity law in Illinois, and actually there is a national law, but it's pretty vague. And so Illinois' law is really among the best in the country that put a little more teeth in this and requires insurance carriers to make sure that the terms and conditions for insurance for mental health care are similar to the terms and conditions for physical health care and for surgical care. For example, hospital stay, if you're giving 7 days hospital stay for in-network, then you ought to give 7 days hospital stay for in-network mental health care. If you have different time period for out-of-network, then you can do that. But again, it's got to match up. Mental health has to match up with the insurance that you have for physical health or surgical care. So this kind of gets through some of the details. And if you look at the bottom of this, the non-quantifiable treatment limitations, NQTLs, that's a big issue. And one of the things that is really important, if I go back up, this particular bill requires that the middle of this, the term medical necessity is not defined in the Illinois bill. And what this requires now is that if you're going to require that a particular mental health condition only be reimbursed if there's a medical necessity, you have to use a proper definition of it. And so this particular bill really refers back to some standard definitions in the medical industry for medical necessity. So it sounds like a simple change, but it really is important because these quantifiable treatment limitations like medical necessity are one of the ways that insurance carriers get away from providing mental health care insurance. And so this particular bill addresses that issue. And so these are some other examples of the non-QTLs that a lot of these are already defined, like the prior to authorization. We do have that in the Illinois bill, but again, this medical necessity is just a one that they've really been using to get away from it. Next up, we have the Suicide Treatment and Improvement Act from Representative Conroy. And this particular bill, it's pretty impressive. It has a whole lot of new requirements for medical care for those that have attempted a suicide. It sets out some of the standards of care that they should have. It requires insurance coverage. So it's a very interesting bill that really is, gets some real teeth into both the type of care that people would get for that are recovering from attempted suicide, and also the care that they should be getting. And so this, there's some information that AFSP has on suicide prevention training, and this bill does require that providers do provide care, and that's going to require the training also. So this gets into some of the training that they will require. So our final priority, investment in statewide response to suicide, so crisis lines. So now this one, if you follow the news, you know that there is going to be a new 3-digit number, 988, but it's not going to come until 2022. And so it's now really up to states to figure out how to incorporate that 988 into the existing system of 800-273-TALK. And also there's an effort to really coordinate that with all mental health crisis, not just suicide prevention. And so I know that there's a group within the Illinois Division of Mental Health that's trying to put together a proposal for that. And one of the things that is eventually going to have to come out of this pretty soon is going to be a bill to actually require some funding for this. And so all we're asking you to do at this time is, if you look at the briefing paper, you'll see, the bottom line for legislatures is we're going to ask them at some point to provide provide some funding so that when, if you look at your phone bill now, you know that there is a small charge for the 911. There will be an additional charge that can be no higher than that for the 988. And but that needs to be done legislatively. Phone companies don't do it on their own. And so at some point after the Department of or Division of Mental Health finishes their work on putting together kind of the background of this, we should see a bill that'll request that funding. And we'll move on. And by the way, one of the things that is really important for Illinois is that we want to get some funding for this so we can start funding the crisis centers themselves. Right now in Illinois, and actually this has been for years, only about 29 to 30% of the calls that people make to the hotline number get answered in the state of Illinois. The rest get overflow into other states or to a national overflow system, so that the people that are answering the phone don't even know the local area, don't know the local resources like they should. So we need to get funding in Illinois just to bring up our services so that more than 29–30% of the calls that people make get answered within the state, and also get answered quickly, because that also requires an additional delay once it gets kicked out of the state. So as we can see here, the bottom line in bold is we urge the General Assembly to pass legislation for a fee for 988. All right, so those are our bills, and again, you'll see that all on the briefing paper that you've got today in the mail, and I think maybe twice. I got one yesterday and another one today. So we are asking you to email your legislators via the Action Center, and again, try and fill in a couple sentences, paragraph or two about your own story. Make it personal as much as you can within the limitations of that particular thing. And by the way, if you haven't used it before, what happens is when you click on our Action Center button, it'll bring up letters to both your own House member and your own state senator. For something here in Illinois, if you're answering an Action Center or alert for a federal bill, you'll see our U.S. Senator and your particular House member. So these are, once we have your, once you signed up for this, we've got your address and we know who your representative and state member are, and we actually fill that all out for you. So it's all set to go. But again, fill in as much as you can for that individual information. Anyway, send them a note, ask them to try and meet. Now they are going to go on vacation in about a week and a half. They'll be gone for 2 weeks, and so they're going to be back home. They're probably home now, but are maybe doing their virtual meetings. But they'll have fewer meetings. They're not going to be any committee meetings, not going to be any sessions. So unless they're heading off to Cancun, you should be able to catch them in their office and have time to meet them during that 2-week Easter break, which starts a week from this Monday. They'll be on that break. So try and schedule something during that 2-week period. It might be a phone call, it might be a Zoom call, maybe even virtual, actually meet them live in their office, whatever works, but try and, set up those meetings, bring that briefing paper with you or send them that briefing paper, and really try to, pick out one of those that interest you, because it's important that you just, there's too much in there for any one person to have as a conversation. Try and find something that's relevant to your life and, discuss that, but also let them know that we all are interested in all these bills. And so this is just something about that Action Center that we have. Again, we do urge you to use that. And well, as I said, call. And by the way, if you look at, we will, and I forget how we're going to get this done. We're going to have to get you phone numbers or email addresses for your state representatives. In fact, actually, what you can do when you, I'm going to send out with an email that'll go out tomorrow. It'll have a spreadsheet of all the state legislators, their phone number, their Springfield office, and the vast majority have an email address. Some of them don't. So you're gonna have to call the office for those and just try and set up a meeting. But in fact, I'd even encourage you just to call the office, or even if they have an email, just it's a little better to have that live conversation. All you're doing is trying to set up a meeting, but do that. If you don't know who your state legislator is, just click on that action order you got yesterday from our national office. And when you do that, you'll see who your state rep and who your state senator are. And then you can just go down that spreadsheet that we'll send you tomorrow that shows all the state representatives and state senators, their email addresses and phone numbers. So contact them, set up a meeting, talk to them, bring them the briefing paper, and offer yourself. If you want to, do one of those Talk Saves Lives presentations, tell them you've got that. And if they want to organize a meeting of their constituents or some group they're interested in, and we can provide a suicide prevention, 30, 40-minute presentation, we'd love to do that. And so definitely offer that kind of thing. And you'll get from us tomorrow a sort of a sample email that you can send to ask for a meeting. We'll get a sample email for a thank you. But again, use your own language. It's important that you use your own story, your own language for all these things, because they know when they're getting a something that's copied. So yeah, after the meeting, send that email, and yeah, if you, we will always be sending you information on upcoming dates for AFSP activities. For example, our walks. Feel free to invite them to a walk, but certainly offer to be a resource. They may, if they need someone to speak about a bill, perhaps they may ask you, or if they just want you to ask, as a contact for us to get them information from our national office or from me for things that they may need. But just be a resource. Tell them that you're always willing to get them what they need on anything they want to do on mental health or suicide prevention. So schedule those meetings as soon as you can. Again, they're off in a week starting Monday, so they're going to have plenty of time to talk to you. When you do that, please, we have a feedback form we'd like you to do. And again, send that thank you email. And got my email here if you want to contact me, and we'll send you a copy of this PowerPoint, by the way, so you can see that too. All right, let me see if we had some questions. I don't see any right now. Courtney, I'm gonna have to ask you to pipe in. Are we gonna be able to do a live Zoom meeting after this, if anybody wants?
Yes, I'll put that in the chat in just a second. So there was one question that I saved, which is, where is the lobbying for minorities? So if you want to address that, and then I'll send the Zoom link we'll have to leave this meeting, and then there'll be a new Zoom link that you'll click on, and that'll join if you want to join us for a live session to ask questions or anything else.
So the question was, can you repeat that, please?
Where is the lobbying for minorities?
Okay. I'm not too sure what that means. I can tell you this. One of the things, in fact, this is something that we were we saw really important in the state suicide prevention plan. We talk a lot there about the need for cultural competency for screening for suicide, for intervention, for treatment. All these things, it's necessary to understand the special risk factors of any minority, race, culture, have their own special risk factors and protective factors. It's important to know what the protective factors are to encourage those. So that's only one thing. I can tell you also, and Tandra, you might want to talk about the work that you're doing with AFSP for increasing our ability to work with minorities and different cultures.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I echoing?
Nope.
Okay. I seem like I am. I'm sorry. So yes, we are doing some work at the, am I echoing or is it just me? Can you hear me?
Sound clear here.
We can hear you fine.
Okay. I'll just have to ignore the noise that I'm hearing, the feedback. But yes, we are doing some work at the national level to look at diversity in our programs and making sure as an organization that we are prioritizing those who are culturally and linguistically different. AFSP as an organization has done a really good job of that, but there clearly is more work to be done. And so I'm part of a task force at the national level that's looking at our programs and our outreach. I know for our AFSP Illinois chapter that our board is very committed to making sure that the voices of all people who are impacted by suicide are heard. And so everything that we do through the lens of cultural humility, making sure that the right voices are at the table and that we are advocating for all people. Interestingly enough, as we were going through, Steve, as you were going through the legislative priorities, that one House bill, I can't remember the number, for school districts. And, you know, they're trying to strengthen that House bill by targeting those at risk. For me as an advocate, there's something missing there. So I am definitely reaching out, because we know from the report that the Congressional Black Caucus published at the end of 2019, that there is a crisis in our country around suicide and Black youth in particular. And so the school boards, right, have to address that issue. And so I will be reaching out tomorrow to my representative to look at that House bill and make sure that it is inclusive of all people, especially those who are from ethnic and racial minority groups. I don't know if that directly answers the question. It was a whole lot, but you know, y'all, you get me talking, I can go on and on. Steve, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, I believe that answered the question, Kendra. Thank you. Okay, so Courtney has, we're going to go ahead and just start the Zoom call now. So if you go down at the bottom, hopefully you can see down at the bottom of my screen at least, there's a Zoom link. So we're going to end this webinar portion and in which you can't talk to us, and start a Zoom meeting where we can all be talking to each other. And so you'll see a whole bunch of, you know, Hollywood Squares windows where, and hopefully, you know, we will all be aware of the fact that we won't talk over each other, and we'll see how this goes. This is a test for us, and we hope it works. All right, thank you. So we're going to end this and go to that Zoom meeting now.